NOS, a tragic anniversary, remembering a fateful day. September 6th, 1990, was a warm Saturday, the day I turned 30. I planned a modest party with close friends to share the joy with my 12-year-old daughter. Nothing extraordinary. A birthday cake and the warm company of friends. As was our tradition, my sister and I took our children to our parents' house for Saturday morning bagels. My mother, or rather my stepmother, Linda, had entered our lives about 5 years earlier after the untimely passing of my real mother. This woman always gave me an inexplicable sense of unease. Her cold, piercing gaze seemed to assess everything around her, as if counting invisible dollars. In Linda's conversations, topics of the house, savings, and my father's assets constantly surfaced. It seemed that her marriage to him was based more on financial gain than on love. However, I tried to ignore it, respecting my father's feelings. That morning, my father wasn't home. He had gone to his parents' house to mow their lawn, as he did every weekend. My father's morning phone call was, as always, cheerful and lively. "Happy birthday, Rebio. See you later." I laughed and said our traditional phrase, "Love you, Daddy." Bagels, cream cheese, salmon, and other traditional treats awaited us at the table. The children, engrossed in games, were laughing. Everything was as usual. About 45 minutes later, the phone rang. Linda, who was in the kitchen, answered it. Suddenly, her face turned deathly pale, as if all the blood had drained from it. She repeated in confusion, "Stroke, stroke." Her voice trembled, but there was a strange artificiality to it. Hanging up, she turned to us with wide eyes and said, "It's your grandfather, your father. He's in the hospital." My world collapsed in an instant. "Dad! Hospital!" My husband and brother-in-law, alarmed, rushed to comfort Linda. Without wasting time, my sister and I grabbed the children, put them in the car, and raced to my grandparents' house. On the way, I tried to reassure myself by resorting to absurd omens. If I get all greens, my father will be okay. If I see children playing, he'll be fine. If a bird flies by, everything will be all right. The warm September wind ruffled my hair, but everything felt wrong. As we pulled up to the house, I heard a heart-wrenching wail, a sound I had never heard before. This loud, desperate cry came from inside the house. My grandmother, my real grandmother, stood on the porch, hunched over and sobbing so loudly that her voice echoed down the street. That sound still haunts me, embodying pure grief and pain. Running to the house, my daughter noticed broken and bent glasses on the grass. Picking them up in confusion, she said, "Mom, there's our grandpa's glasses." Confusion flashed through my mind. No, wait. Dad was her grandfather. No, my dad was her grandfather. My brain refused to accept reality. My dad is dead. Her grandfather. I felt sick. My grandfather returned from the hospital shortly afterward, shaking his head helplessly. He was silent at first, but his face spoke volumes. Relatives began to arrive, uncles, aunts. Then the terrible truth came out. My father didn't have a stroke. It was a massive heart attack. He had collapsed right on the lawn while mowing. Passing sanitation workers witnessed the tragedy. They rushed to help him, trying to give him CPR along with my grandfather. But it was all in vain. He died before he hit the ground. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The party was, of course, out of the question. Everyone sat in a daze, overwhelmed by grief. Linda, who arrived later, feigned inconsolable sorrow, hugging everyone. But her eyes, they darted around the room, as if she were already contemplating her next steps, the house, the money. It filled me with a horrible irritation that I tried to suppress. Grief can do strange things. For the next 15 years, I couldn't bear to hear birthday greetings without shuddering. I forbade them. If anyone dared to say those words, I would scold them severely. Even now, 36 years later, I don't celebrate my birthday in a big way. September 6th is just a day to get through. But I have enormous respect for sanitation workers, considering them true heroes. A few months after my father's death, even stranger things began to happen. I was helping to sort through his belongings in the house. Linda, who lived there alone, was eager to sell everything as quickly as possible. "We need to move on," she said, but her voice sounded more greedy than grieving. One day, while cleaning out the kitchen cabinets, in the furthest corner where you rarely look, I found a bottle of syrup hidden behind old jars. It was a plain glass bottle with a thick, dark liquid without a label. A strange place for syrup, I thought. Taking it home, I started searching for information online. It turned out it wasn't ordinary syrup. The description, the color, even a photo uploaded to several forums, all pointed to one thing. It matched the description of a homemade mixture with digoxin, a heart medication derived from foxglove. It's prescribed for heart problems, but in large doses, it's deadly, especially for elderly people like my father, who was in his 50s. It can cause irregular heartbeats, leading to a massive attack, and worst of all, it's hard to detect in an autopsy unless you specifically look for it. Story 1. My father's death was ruled a natural cause, raising no suspicion of foul play. However, traces of a substance were found in one of the bottles, which tested positive after an anonymous sample was sent to a lab. Gradually, sinister details began to emerge. Linda, a former nurse, had knowledge of medications. She expressed dissatisfaction with my father's unwillingness to do household chores and how property taxes were draining their savings. She longed to possess everything alone. The sinister glances and the hasty organization of the house sale began to form a single picture. She had probably been adding the poisonous substance to his food or coffee, gradually accumulating to a critical dose. Working in the garden was probably the final straw that pushed his heart over the edge. After this discovery, sleep deserted me, and nightmares of my father falling and Linda's cold smile haunted me. First, I anonymously contacted the police, providing them with all the details. They reopened the investigation, tested the contents of the bottle, and exhumed my father's body for a toxicology examination. Traces of digoxin were found. Linda vehemently denied any involvement, but foxglove was found in her garden, hidden in a secluded spot. Emails with information about natural heart remedies and inheritance laws were found on her computer. A week later, she was arrested. Despite her cries of innocence, the evidence relentlessly mounted. The trial was swift, and she was sentenced to life in prison for murder. That day, my grandmother sincerely mourned her loss, but Linda's tears were later revealed to be fake. She had taken my father's life out of greed. Story 2, my 16th birthday, is etched in my memory as if it happened just yesterday, even though it was years ago. My name is Smith, and I live in a quiet suburb near Chicago. My older brother, Alan, who was 22, was always known for his love of pranks. He declared that he was going to make my birthday unforgettable, and took it upon himself to organize a party at our house. Our parents were away for the weekend, visiting relatives in Ohio, so it was just me, Alan, and about a dozen friends from school at the house. The party started around 7 o'clock on Friday evening. Alan decorated the living room with balloons and streamers, ordered pizza from Domino's, and got a cake from the local Walmart bakery. My friends gradually arrived, guys, like Ben, Tyler, and Chris, and a few girls, including Sophia and Emily. We played video games on the Xbox, enjoyed music from Spotify through a Bluetooth speaker, and just hung out. Alan was acting mysterious, smirking at me. About an hour in, he pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me about a surprise. He had hired actors from a local theater group to stage a fake home invasion. They were supposed to burst in wearing masks and wielding toy guns, scare everyone a little, and then reveal the prank. He asked me to play along and pretend to be scared. I chuckled, knowing Alan's penchant for such antics. Last year, he hid in my closet, dressed as a clown to scare me. I figured it would be harmless fun, and agreed to play along. We went back to the party, and everything seemed normal. Guests were taking selfies on their iPhones, sharing moments on Snapchat, and snacking on chips from Costco bags. Around 9 o'clock, something strange happened. The lights started flickering, which Alan had probably arranged using Philips Hue smart bulbs. Then the back door burst open, and 4 guys in black ski masks stormed in, shouting, "Everyone on the floor! This is a robbery!" They had guns that looked like toy models, with orange tips, the kind you can buy on Amazon, and one had a knife that looked like plastic. My friends screamed and dropped to the floor. Sophia burst into tears, and Ben exclaimed, "What the hell?" I tried to feign shock, but inside, I was smirking. I even whispered to Tyler, who was standing next to me, "It's Alan's prank, relax." The robbers started herding us into the living room, tying our hands with cheap plastic zip ties from Home Depot. Alan was tied up too, winking at me when no one was looking. One of the guys, who I'll call Mask 1, was tall and skinny. He demanded our wallets and phones, threatening, "Give us your stuff or else." His voice sounded fake and gruff. The guests panicked, but I kept saying, Guys, it's probably just a joke. Alan likes this kind of stuff." Emily gave me an angry look. "Smith, shut up. This isn't funny at all." That's when I started noticing details that seemed off. The script Alan had described was simple. Scare us, take fake loot, and then take off the masks and laugh. But one of the robbers, a short, stocky guy, Mask 4, wasn't following the plan. He was quiet, moving around the edges of the room and rummaging through drawers in the kitchen, while the others were yelling. I saw him pocket my mom's jewelry box, which had her real gold earrings from Macy's in it. Hey, that's not part of the prank, I thought, but I decided not to make a big deal of it. Maybe Alan had added something else. The real horror started when Mask 4 came back. He had a knife in his hand, but up close, it didn't look like plastic. It had a serrated edge, like a real kitchen knife from our IKEA set. No shiny fake glint, just dull steel. He leaned over Sophia, who was sobbing on the carpet, and pressed the knife to her arm. "Give me your necklace," he growled in a low, raspy voice that didn't sound theatrical. Sophia struggled to take off her necklace, a cheap silver chain from Target, but her arm was slightly cut. A thin line of blood appeared and she cried out in pain. She let out a painful moan. The narrator's heart pounded in his chest. "Wait, that's real blood," he muttered. not believing his eyes. His gaze darted to Alan, who was standing on the other side of the room, his eyes wide with horror. He whispered almost inaudibly, "What?" The narrator tried to croak in response. "Yell, Alan. This isn't a game. The knife is real." But one of the actors, hidden by the mask, drowned out his words, rudely interrupting, "Quiet, kid," as if following a pre-written script. The friends, unaware of the danger, took his words for another joke. Chris even laughed nervously. "Smith, stop fooling around. It's creepy enough as it is." The chaos was escalating like an ominous wave. The robbers were supposed to be ending their performance, but Mask 4 continued to escalate the situation. He smashed a vase that stood on the mantelpiece, a real ceramic vase, not a cheap prop, and began collecting phones in a black duffel bag apparently purchased at Dick's Sporting Goods. "No calling the police," he said, but his tone was menacingly serious, devoid of any playfulness. The narrator remembered Alan's words that the actors would pretend to cut the phone lines. But this madman ripped the cord of the landline phone out of the wall and stomped on it with his rough boots. Timberlands, it seemed. The narrator desperately tried to free himself from the zip ties which were tied too tightly. "Guys, listen, that's not an actor," he hissed to Ben and Tyler. "Look at his knife. It's from our kitchen." Ben glanced in the indicated direction and frowned. "Dude, you're paranoid." Alan thought of everything, he countered. But at that moment, Mask 4 snatched Emily's purse and rudely began rummaging through it. When the girl tried to protest, he pushed her toward the couch. She hit her head on the armrest, and a bruise formed on her forehead. This was no longer a game. Alan finally realized what was happening. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Okay, the prank's over, guys! Stop it!" The three actors hesitated, glancing at each other in confusion under their masks. Mask 1 tore off his mask. Underneath was some college student named Ryan, whom Alan knew from working together at Starbucks. "Wait, what's going on?" Ryan asked in confusion. "We're supposed to follow the plan." But Mask 4 ignored him. He lunged for the front door with the duffel bag full of phones, wallets, and jewelry. "Screw this," he muttered, his voice muffled by the mask. Panic erupted. Alan shouted, "That's not one of ours!" The actors began hastily untying the captives, rummaging in a drawer for scissors. Everyone rushed in pursuit of the robber, but he turned out to be nimble. He jumped over the fence in the backyard, an ordinary chain-link fence from Lowe's, and disappeared into the night. Distant sirens wailed. Someone must have called 911 from the house next door, hearing the screams. The police arrived in about 10 minutes. 2 patrol cars from the local precinct. They took statements, but there was complete chaos. The friends were in a state of deep shock. Sophia needed stitches on her arm, and Emily was diagnosed with a concussion. The actors confessed everything, producing emails from Alan, who had hired them through Craigslist for $200 each. Alan was in serious trouble, community service, and a fine for making a false police report. But the real criminal got away scot-free. The police officer speculated that he had probably seen the actors arrive in advance, lost himself among them in a similar mask that he had acquired somewhere, and used the prank as the perfect cover. There had been an increase in burglaries in the area that summer, targeting homes in suburbs like this one. He was never caught. The phones disappeared without a trace. iPhones, Samsungs, all with photos and contacts. Insurance covered only part of the losses, but the feeling of insecurity remained. The narrator still double-checks the locks before going to bed and celebrates birthdays modestly, without much fanfare. Alan apologizes every year, but that night still haunts him. What if he had raised the alarm earlier? What if the knife had gone in deeper? It's frightening to think how a stupid prank can turn into a real nightmare in a matter of seconds. Story 3. The narrator was turning 21 and was over the moon. He'd been planning this party for weeks. He rented a large Airbnb house in suburban Atlanta, Georgia, one of those old houses with a spacious backyard, perfect for a barbecue. He invited about 30 friends from college and high school, as well as a few family members. His younger brother, Jake, who was only 14, came along too because his parents wanted him to keep an eye on things. He mostly stayed in the living room, glued to his Nintendo Switch, playing Fortnite. The party started around 7:00 p.m. on a warm June day. Drake and Post Malone blared from a Bluetooth speaker, and burgers from Walmart sizzled enticingly on the grill. Everyone was laughing and taking selfies on their iPhones. It was one of those nights that sticks in your memory forever. Around 9 p.m., a stranger knocked on the door. He was in his early 30s, maybe a little older, with short brown hair, wearing a plain black hoodie and jeans. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder. The narrator didn't recognize him, but people often bring friends to parties like these. The stranger smiled and said, "Hey, happy birthday. I'm a friend of Mike's." Mike was one of his college buddies who had invited a few more people, so the narrator didn't think much of it. He let the stranger in and pointed him to the snack table. "Help yourself to some chips or whatever." He nodded and blended into the crowd. The narrator didn't pay much attention, as he was busy hanging out with his friends and playing cornhole in the backyard. The birthday celebration was in full swing in the moonlit yard. However, as time passed, worrying details began to emerge. The stranger, whose name remained a mystery, kept to himself. He loomed near groups of people, listening to their conversations but not joining in. From time to time, he discreetly pulled tiny plastic baggies from his pocket, like the ones sold in pharmacies. These manipulations occurred surreptitiously when he thought he wasn't being watched. A concerned friend, Nicole, pulled the narrator aside around 10:30. "That guy in the hoodie is creeping me out," she whispered. "He's been staring at people, and I think I saw him slip something into someone's drink." A chill ran down the narrator's spine. He hadn't witnessed it himself, but Nicole wasn't prone to making things up. They decided to keep an eye on the stranger. The narrator's attention focused on the suspicious guest. He circled near the kitchen table, which was set with red plastic cups. The narrator noticed him leaning over one of them, making a quick hand movement, as if throwing something inside. His heart pounded. Was this man trying to poison someone? After making sure that Nicole stayed near the other friends, the narrator headed for Jake. Immersed in his headphones, he was still in the living room, oblivious to what was happening. Returning to the kitchen, the narrator came face to face with the stranger. "Hey buddy, what's going on?" he asked, trying to keep it casual. He replied with a strained smile. "Just enjoying the party, birthday boy." There was an unpleasant sweetness in his voice, as if he was hiding something. The narrator stated that he didn't know him and demanded that he leave. The stranger shrugged, grabbed his backpack, and left the house. That seemed to be the end of it. Around midnight, the guests began to leave. The narrator was cleaning up when he received a frantic call from his mother. "Where's Jake?" she asked. His heart sank. The narrator rushed to the living room. His brother's game console was left on the couch, but Jake himself was gone. The search encompassed the entire house, the backyard, every corner. Not Jake. Friends joined the search, but it was all in vain. Nicole remembered seeing Jake talking to someone at the front door, but didn't think anything of it. Panic began to mount. The narrator called 911, Ennis. The police arrived promptly. The narrator shared all the information, including a description of the stranger, black hoodie, jeans, backpack. Several friends confirmed they had seen the person. One of the cousins mentioned seeing him talking to Jake on the street, offering to show him some cool game. The narrator's legs went weak. Could this person have taken his brother? The police immediately issued an alert and began scouring the area. Everyone was told to stay indoors in case Jake returned. Time crawled by agonizingly slowly, and the narrator began to lose control, imagining the worst. Around 4 a.m, a call came from the police. The stranger had been found hiding in an abandoned building about a mile away. An old warehouse on Peachtree Road, a place where teenagers often hung out. Jake's phone and several plastic baggies containing a white powder were found on him. The police suspected it was narcotics, possibly a sedative. The stranger was immediately arrested. Jake was found not far from the warehouse, frightened but unharmed. He said the stranger offered to show him a new game on his phone, lured him outside, and tried to drag him to some cool place. Scared, Jake ran, but the stranger managed to grab his phone. The police are continuing their investigation to determine the stranger's true intentions, but it is suspected that he was preying on children at parties for robbery or something even more sinister. The narrator can't shake the feeling of guilt. It was his party, his house, and he let the man in. Jake is safe, but deeply shaken, as is the narrator himself. His thoughts keep returning to those plastic baggies. What might have happened if Nicole hadn't been vigilant, or if Jake hadn't run? The 21st birthday was supposed to be an unforgettable event, but it turned into a nightmare that will never be forgotten.